episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show. Big thank you to all the congratulatory comments and messages that I've received. Very, very much appreciated. So, on to the next 500 then. Yes, and obviously a big thank you to both Dram and House of Macduff, who said said nice things about the show and were happy with what I said. And I suppose it's always the way when you say nice things about people's products, they're all happy. So everybody's happy and everybody's a winner and all that kind of stuff. And a big thank you as well to those of you that have not just purchased things that I reviewed like last week, although that was really cool, but people that have purchased things not just from obviously the company that employs me, but from anywhere really, for stuff that they thought, oh yeah, that sounds really intriguing, and have purchased it and said, yeah, that was really, really cool. Obviously there are probably people that have purchased stuff that I've said really good and have gone, oh dear God, what the hell's this? But they don't tend to say things, which is kind of quite nice. But of course, as we well know, with whiskey and any alcoholic product, obviously the opinions that I give on the show are wholly my own opinions. They have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me, and of course they are wholly my opinions. So if you disagree with me, then fine, cool, no problem with that whatsoever. Right, okay, so on to this week's episode of the show. As you can see from the title page, we're looking at a selection of brand new first quarter releases from the independent bottling company Hannah Whisky Merchants, and specifically their single cask range called the Lady of the Glen. Now, I haven't been working with them for that long, but I think this is the 6th episode of the show I've done on their stuff. And I kind of like what they're up to. I mean, like with all independents, there's been some bottlings that I've not been a particularly big fan of, and some that have been a big fan of. So yeah, this quite conveniently, the first quarter releases in that range happen to be 6. So nice range. When I get to the actual the lineup, you'll see sort of like a nice selection of different distilleries, different cask types, and this is one of the things it seems to me that the guys at Hannah Whisky Merchants are sort of trying a few intriguing things out, certainly with different cask finishes and what have you, some of which appear to be quite successful, others maybe not quite so successful, but that's obviously the nature of the beast. You keep experimenting and trying different things, and it's some are successful and some aren't, but anyway. So yes, a big thank you to both Hannah and to Paul from Hannah Whisky Merchants for the samples for today's episode of the show. Hopefully we'll still be friends at the end of it, but I'm sure we will. You guys and they you know me by now. Harsh but fair sometimes. But yeah. So anyway, I think it's enough waffling, isn't it? All cask strength samples today, so the butt is full. Anyway, right, let's take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the older spirit today. This is a 22-year-old Dumbarton grain. Now, it's always difficult to sort of know where to stick a grain, so to speak, in a lineup. Certainly when you've got different cask types and sort of peated ones, etc., etc. So I think it's just easier to stick it at the beginning. But they tend to be the most the oldest of the spirit. But even say this is 22 years old and bottled at 62.1%. Oh my God, was that cask tighter than a gnat's chuff, as they say. So yes, it's distilled in 2000, bottled like all of these earlier this year, or possibly late last year, not entirely sure, but it's a refill Bourbon Hoggy 211903. So nice to see just an old grain in American oak. So yeah, let's see what that's like. Bottling number 2 is the first of the malts. This is a 8-year-old Blair Athol, again first fill hoggy, 312607, distilled in 2014, bottled probably this year. So looking forward to that. Always like Blair Athol in American oak, nice weighty malt, and we'll see how that one stacks up. Right, moving on to a 12-year-old Teaninich. This is one of the first of the weird and wonderful cask finishes. It does make you wonder sometimes when you sort of look at the sort of lists of independent bottling stuff, and you know, a lot of them are playing around with weird and wonderful cask types. Like, for example, the Cask Noir range that I reviewed a few weeks ago, you know, Pacheron cask. I mean, has anybody ever heard of Pacheron? Indeed. And you do kind of think, well, do these different weird and wonderful casks actually add anything to the finished spirit? And we will obviously find out in this case, because this 12-year-old Teaninich has been finished in an ex-akavit barrel. Now, for those of you that don't know what an akavit is, it is a Scandinavian flavoured spirit, basically. It's a bit like a gin without juniper, although, you know, they do tend to use juniper, but they use sort of, you know, Scandinavian botanicals. It's a bit of an acquired taste, I have to say. I mean, a lot of them do tend to feature aniseed and things like that, and so if you like those kind of aniseed flavoured spirits, not to say that every akavit has got aniseed in, but they do tend to be that kind of way inclined. Like I said, a bit of a like I said, it's a bit, they're a bit of a Marmite thing, I suppose. Anyway, so this is cask 721589, distilled in 2010 and bottled at 57.3%. So we'll see how much influence the akavit cask and what influence that it gives the spirit. Moving on to a 11-year-old Tormore. This is slightly more conventional, although yeah, it's slightly more conventional. It's a Sautern's finish. Cask number 1. Now, as I said the other week about cask numbers, I mean, I can't believe this is the first cask to ever be released by Tormore. I mean, the distillery has been around since the Victorian times, so they have distilled more than one cask. So it may well be the first cask of 2011. Possibly. Anyway, so it's a Sautern's barrique finish, distilled in 2011, bottled at 55.1%. Penultimate bottling is a Glen Elgin, and now there does seem to be a bit of a fetish amongst independent bottling companies for finishing Glen Elgin in other casks, specifically wine barriques, which this one is. It's an STR wine barrique as well, so cask number 800179. I think it's possibly because there is or certainly if you look at independent bottling companies' lists and of what's being released, there is a sort of a shrinkage in the diversity of certain of lists. They do tend to feature a lot of the same distilleries, because there's obviously only a handful of distilleries that are kind of quite happy to sell their casks onto the open market, and so therefore independent bottling companies are having to become a little bit creative. You know, so you don't want a list with half a dozen Glen Elgins all aged in American oak, because everyone's going to go, well, what's the difference? And there probably is very little. I mean, Glen Elgin is a very lovely whiskey, and it's a very consistent whiskey. So and it's got the weight and the cojones, unlike some of the lighter ones, which I often sort of think, well, why on earth have you finished, say, you know, something like a Teaninich, for example, you know, in a sort of like first fill, you know, Oloroso hoggy, you know, because you know that you ain't going to get anything out of that. But anyway, now we'll see. I mean, like I said, Glen Elgin does seem to be, you know, a good choice for independents to start sort of sticking into ex-wine casks and things like that. So we'll see how judicious that actually is. So like I said, just 15 years old, distilled in 2008, bottled at 58.5%. Whew, that's got quite some alcohol as well. And the final bottle is a PT1, you know, which is always cool to finish on a PT1. This is an Ardmore. Now again, another one distillery that seems to be quite happy to flog its casks to all and sundry. Again, 13 years old, 58.3%. I think I'm going to need a lay down after today's episode of the show, I think. And straightforward refill bourbon barrel, 708852, distilled in 2009 and bottled, well, like I said, sometime probably late last year or early this year, I would imagine. So that's today's lineup. I think it's going to be an intriguing one. So let's kick off with a bit of old grain then. So why do you wanna hurt me? Right, okay, so 22-year-old Dumbarton. Let's see what news gives us on there. Oh, I can't speak. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the 22-year-old Dumbarton. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That's actually quite a nice sweet nose. It's got that sort of, it's got an almost kind of Sauternes-like honeyed kind of character. Almost tropical as well. Quite unusual. I mean, you know, it's got the Dumbarton weight. It's got the classical dried fruits, dried apricot, sultana, light dried fruit, a little bit of wood spice, some sawdust, but it really is generous and fruity. I mean, I'm not saying it's an estuary fruit bomb, but from a grain perspective, it has an awful lot of almost tropical fruit. And like I said, it's not common. A little bit of cereal, touch of vanilla, not a great deal of oak character, but enough. And so it's all about the lovely character of the spirit, and that is, yeah, good age. I mean, it's 22, it doesn't smell that old, but then grain whiskies don't have a tendency to sort of exhibit overtly old oak character until they're sort of into their 30s and their 40s, which is why they kind of bottle them at that kind of age. But anyway, that's a lovely nose. That really is quite pleasant. Let's do a last one. Now, considering that is 62%, it is not a tongue ripper. Beautifully beautifully balanced, I should say. Again, quite rich, quite honeyed. Alcohol is keeping that sort of honeyed sweetness in check, and likewise the honeyed sweetness is keeping the alcohol in check. Again, slightly tropical, dried fruit, sultana, dried grape, a little bit of wood spice, a little bit of vanilla. The finish is a smidge masked. The alcohol does kind of finally poke through on the end, but you know what? You could drink that neat, and that'd be dangerous. A couple of glasses of that, and you stand up, and you probably know about it. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to things. Okay, we're kind of more classically grain now. It's taken away that sort of pseudo Sauternes sweetness, that honeyed sweetness. It's a lot fresher, it's a lot crisper, it's a lot more, you know, grainy dried fruits, a little bit more wood spice in actual fact, and citrus. Nice, still a really good nose. Let's see what passes right now. The palate, on the other hand, is quite a bit more sweeter. The alcohol seems to have allowed that sort of honeyed sweetness now to sort of become more noticeable. There's also a more noticeable oak character as well. There's a slight creaminess to the oak with a sort of substrata of toffee. Quite cereally, again, dried fruit, not as kind of tropical. A little bit longer, softer. Slight bit of bittering right on the aftertaste. Lovely, really very, very nice. And it's just one of these whiskies that is just kind of, you either drink it neat or you drink it with a little drop of water, and either way it is absolutely stunning. 3 figures, forget the retail price, but it's certainly up there and out there. And if you're watching in Europe, obviously it does seem to be, obviously, as you well know, Lady of the Glen's quite popular in Europe. So yeah, if you like old grains, that's not a bad one. Do you wanna hurt me? I shiver with to the first malt. So this is the 8-year-old Blair Athol. Let's see what the nose gives us on this now, shall we? It's a bit acetic. Green fruit, green sort of banana, green gooseberry. It's a bit raw, shall we say. It's a bit kind of untamed. Slightly industrial, ever so slightly industrial. It's got raw oak as well. It's not particularly soft and fluffy, shall we say. It's got an intensity. It's a sort of style of whiskey that you kind of have to like. Don't really warm to it, to be bluntly honest with you. First thoughts, should have spent more time in the cask, or should have been finished in a Sauternes cask. I think it just kind of doesn't quite have the balancing sweetness to all that sort of acetic green fruit. Maybe a little drop of water will bring out some sweetness, but obviously we'll find that out when we get to it. Let's see what the pal's like. Chewy, malty, as you would expect from Blair Athol, but again, there's that sort of slightly industrial barley note, slightly acetic green fruit. It's a bit hard. It's a bit, you know, the alcohol is definitely noticeable, and it kind of enhances that sort of acetic fruit. A little bit of tannin. You can feel or sense that there is some weight of sweetness kind of there, and it's kind of maybe a bit of honey. There may well be a bit of vanilla sweetness, and it is really being held in check by the alcohol. Let's have a little drop of water with it and see whether that kind of releases the sweetness or not. Okay, positives, it does release the sweetness. Negatives, that sweetness is a bit kind of sherbety and a bit confected. It's all a bit of an odd nose, I think. It's kind of, like I said, confected, sherbety sweetness, green fruit, hard barley. It's a sort of it's a difficult one to love, it has to be said. Yeah. It's kind of, it is a, yeah, I mean, I get that kind of green fruit, that's sometimes lime and gooseberry and all that kind of stuff in Spays. And sometimes like this, it can just be that little bit too aggressive, and not, it's just not kind of integrated enough into the rest of the characters. I mean, that's just me. Anyway, let's see what comes out now. It has brought out some sweetness, more of the oak sweetness, more of the vanilla, the sort of vanilla cream. The complexity, I'm not getting on all. It's got a sort of an intimation of kind of green citrus fruit, lime possibly. But aside from that, it's not particularly complex. It's not particularly much other than just the oak at the end of the day. It's a difficult one, I think. It may well have benefited from more time in the cask. The oak character might have settled down. You might have lost some of the astringency. I don't know. It's always a hard one. Maybe that one should have been finished in a Sauternes cask, possibly. But anyway, not my favourite. Right, okay, so let's move on to the weird and wacky Teaninich. I mean, I suppose the thing is with Teaninich, it's a light kind of, often evanescent kind of spay. So yeah, it's going to sort of absorb, you know, finishing casks quite merrily, which is probably why it tends to get finished in an inordinate amount of different casks. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us on this, shall we? Right, well, the cask is obviously noticeable from the word go. It's got that distinctly herbally, sort of ferny, sort of not quite scrubby, but you know, undergrowthy kind of character. There's a little bit of of dark fruit, bruised dark fruit, possibly berries. There's some aniseed, malt, sour grape. That's an interesting nose, it has to be said. It has worked quite well with the Teaninich actually. It seems to have kind of brought out the maltiness of Teaninich. Not that maltiness is something that I've ever used as a describer for Teaninich, it has to be said, but you know, I like that. It's unusual. I like a bit of weird and wonderful, as you well know. But as long as it's kind of pleasantly weird and wonderful, as opposed to sort of like, you know, rip your nose out or your tongue out kind of weird. No, I think this has worked really quite well. Don't know how long this has been finishing in the cask, but it's obviously the balance is pretty good. And like I said, you're certainly getting some malty notes underneath it. Maybe not the sort of usual kind of Teaninich kind of citric grassiness, but you know what? It's balanced. I'm kind of happy with this. See what it does, right? Rich, malty, not so in your face of akavit character. It's got the slight aniseed, licorice, malt, earth, a little bit of tannin, a little bit of bitterness. It dries a little bit on the finish. The finish is a little bit masked. It's 57.3%. It's a bit of dried grape. It's interesting. It's slightly unusual, it has to be said. Like I said, it seems to have brought out the sort of the maltiness of the spirit, which again is not something you would normally associate with Teaninich. Right, let's put a little drop of water with that and see what that does to it. A little sweeter, a little grapier possibly. And maybe getting a little bit more of what I would expect of a Teaninich kind of character. It's got that a little bit more kind of crisp, herbally note, but it's kind of, maybe it's kind of working in with the akavit. It's kind of, you know, got that sort of leafy, fennelly kind of herbal note on the nose. Less overt akavit, it has to be said, but you know, pleasant, really quite pleasant. Let's see what it passes right now. Still quite malty, but a little leaner. A little bit more citric notes coming through on the mid palate. There's a little astringency on the finish, a little bitterness. But it's got a nice, again, it's got a lovely herbal kind of grapey kind of character. It's got a lovely length. It's unusual but not too weird, if you see what I mean. It's kind of probably given Teaninich a little bit more character, you could argue, I suppose. So overall, I like that. I think that's impressive. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Sauternes cask finish. Tormore. Let's see when those good on this hand, shall we? That's quite a raw Sauternes cask. It's not a kind of soft and fluffy and sort of honeyed. It's got that kind of raw honey and raw tannins and lots of wood and edgy kind of sweetness to it. It's kind of not, like I say, it's not soft and fluffy. There's a bit of beeswax, a bit of dried apricot. I'm not getting a huge amount of Tormore kind of character, but then again, you know, what character does Tormore have? It's a question that has perplexed a lot of people for a lot of time, I think. Yeah, it's kind of, it's raw. It's like sniffing the inside of a kind of Sauternes cask. It's not, like I say, it's not soft and fluffy and inviting. It's kind of, yeah, intense, I think is a good word. Anyway, let's see what the pass on. it tastes like licking out the inside of a Sauternes cask. It really is. I mean, it's kind of raw, it's woody, it's tannic. There's some honey there, but whoa, it's kind of hidden, well hidden under all that tannin and alcohol. Wood smoke as well. Almost kind of meaty, barbecuey wood smoke. It's raw, it's intense. I mean, it's a whole load of fun, it has to be said. I mean, it's not particularly well balanced. It's all about the cask at the end of the day. And yes, there's a bit of alcohol happening there, and there's maybe a little bit of barley. But like I said, that has intensity. That's real fun. I mean, this is one of the things about, you know, the what's the word? No, dichotomy is the word that springs to mind, but it's not really the word I was kind of searching for. But it's sort of, sometimes I can come across as I bang on about balance. I love beautifully balanced whiskies where everything is harmonious. But every now and again, I just feel like I want to go to the dark side. You know, something like this, although wholly and utterly unbalanced, and I would normally go, oh no, too much cask. Sometimes you just go, ooh, yeah, that's intense. That's kind of, yeah, over to the dark side. Let's put a little bit of water with that and see if it kind of mitigates some of the. It's still pretty cask orientated. It's a little softer now. It's a little sweeter, a little bit more honeyed. But it's still pretty much the Sauternes cask. See what the pass on that. Like the nose, a little bit softer. There's still that slight rawness there, that slight sort of grippy, spicy tannin wood smoke. I like it. I mean, you know, this is one of those kind of whiskies that sort of like, you know, on paper, it's unbalanced to hell. You know, well, even tasting it, it's unbalanced. It's all about the Sauternes cask, but there's something quite appealing about it, and I think it is the sort of like the sort of the rawness of it, the fact that it is literally like shoving your tongue into the cask itself, and I like it.
Your words are haunting me. Okay,
let's move on to the Glen Elgin. So this is the Profiler STR cask finish. Let's see what the note gives on this. Noticeable STR cask. It's got quite a lot of sweet, winey, chunky STR cask notes. Spice, tannin, a little bit of menthol, some syrup coated fruit, some barley, I am getting some rich Glen Elgin character underneath this, and this is obviously why Indies are using Glen Elgin to finish, because it seems to have, it has the cojones to stand up to this kind of battering from port and wine and all that kind of stuff. Nice nose, just about balanced, I would say. Just edging slightly more towards the STR wininess, but you know, it's an intriguing nose. It's interesting. It's kind of like, you know, just give, and this is where what you want from a cask finish. You want it to add a nuance, something just to you know, enhance maybe the character of the spirit. You don't want it to completely mask, and I think, again, yeah, judicious, nicely done. Let's see what the pass on. A little heavy on the cask finish, lots of juicy, syrupy, winey red fruits, spice, tannin, chocolate, dark chocolate, bitter dark chocolate. But I am getting a little bit of honey. There is a little bit of underripe green fruit, green banana, bit of gooseberry, some apricot, lovely sweetness, that sort of STR sort of syrupy sweetness is kind of, or the winey sweetness is kind of, you know, you get it at the beginning and it just carries through for the entire palate, and it kind of like sets a sort of like sort of a bedrock, I suppose, for want of a better word, where all the other flavours are moving around it, and you've got this kind of like, you know, pleasant syrup sweetness just sort of going right the way through it. And so yes, you get a little bit of bitterness, but it's not kind of overt. It has a balancing factor. And again, although I think it is a little heavy on the cask finish, I think the balance is actually not too bad at all. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. Right, okay, now I'm getting honeyed Elgin character. It's got some maltiness, some juiciness. The STR cask notes are dialed down. It's really quite harmonious. Aromatic, a little bit of sweet vanilla, almost sort of vanilla pod. But beeswax again. Yeah, that's a lovely nose. Diluted, I think the nose really comes out nicely. So what that's like. Likewise the palate. STR cask notes have now dialed down. I'm getting white fruit, apple, apricot, a little bit of peach possibly. Still got some tannin, still got some nice structure to it, a little bit of chocolate, dark chocolate, spice, winey red fruits right on the finish now. Bloody good. That's all I can say. That is a lovely whiskey. And again, I think it works better possibly with a little drop of water, but either way, another one of those whiskies that works really well, neat or diluted. But yeah, I like that. That's impressive. Right, okay, so on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. So this is the 13-year-old Ardmore. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Classic Ardmore at the end of the day. It's that kind of big herbal peat, that sootiness, that cardamom, that sort of slight strawberry mousse kind of note, that sort of you know, sort of peated Loch Lomond-y kind of character, but it's not too weird. It's got a touch of astringent green fruit, some vanilla, marzipan. It actually doesn't feel 13, it feels an awful lot younger, and this is one of the things about Ardmore. It kind of, you know, if you ignore the frankly dull distillery bottling and pick up an independent, you get a spirit that just has an inordinate amount of character. I mean, you know, it's just, yeah, I suppose it's a character that you've got to like. Like I said, it's kind of in that kind of Loch Lomond-y, peated, Auchentoshan-y kind of character. So you have to like a little bit of weird and wonderful, but it's actually quite sort of controlled, if you see what I mean. A little bit of tar. Let's see what the palate's like. Oh, it's got a chewy kind of charcoal sort of peat briquettes kind of finish. It's oily, it's viscous, it's barleyed, it's again touch of strawberry mousse, lots of peat, dry peat, earthy peat, dusty peat, a little bit of smoked meat as well. I mean, again, Ardmore is just such a great spirit. It's so underappreciated, and you know, there's an awful lot of it out there, and a lot of it is very, very good, and this is very good. It just seems to me that sort of Ardmore produces great spirit, but the distillery bottling is just really, frankly, as dull as ditch water. And it's kind of like, you know, how do you make such a great spirit dull? They managed to. Love that. That's really, really impressive. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. It's pretty much still quite stringent. It's kind of still got the green fruit, the sort of, gooseberry and maybe less of the strawberry mousse note now and less sweetness. Or possibly maybe a little bit less peat as well, but a little bit more kind of raw, kind of green fruit. I think I prefer the nose neat actually. Sure, pass on. It's a little bit confected. It's kind of got that bubblegummy white fruit, which I don't mind, but it just doesn't seem to sort of sit right with the peat and the astringency and the astringent kind of herbal notes. I prefer that neat. I think that works a lot better without putting a little drop of water with it. You kind of like don't get that sort of overly confected sweetness, which is really not what I actually want with Ardmore. I want the weird and the wacky and the peaty kind of character. I don't want this kind of strange confected sweetness happening. So forget diluting it, drink it neat, and that's really Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, firstly, a big thank you again to the Lady of the Glen, or Hannah Whiskey Merchants, the case may be, for the samples of today's episode of the show. Certainly no stinkers, one or two that, maybe don't quite float my boat as much as others, but the Dumbarton, bloody good, really good, and I mean seriously good. Unlike any other Dumbarton I've ever come across. It is really fruity without diluting it. Diluting it kind of becomes more of a classic grain whiskey, but neat, good, really good. Blair Athol, it's okay. Bit raw, bit sort of intense, bit young. Could have possibly done with more time in the cask, or finishing in a Sauternes cask. That would have been ideal, I think. But as it is, it just was a little bit too on the raw side. The Teaninich, the Akavit cask certainly came through when it was neat, and it kind of, like I said, it kind of drew out this kind of maltiness, which is just quite unusual for Teaninich. And like I said, although it's a bit of an odd cask to use, I think it worked really well, and I actually really like that. The Tormore, again, quite raw, quite intense Sauternes. Like I said, it's kind of almost like sticking your tongue into the barrel and licking it. It's not soft and fluffy and sort of honeyed Sauternes. It's the raw kind of stuff, and yeah, I actually quite liked it, even though it was wholly and utterly unbalanced, and something I would ordinarily probably say no, but in this instance I'm saying yes. The Glen Elgin, yeah, I liked that. I thought that worked really quite well. Glen Elgin certainly seems to have the character, the cojones, the sort of the weight to basically stand up to a good battering from an STR cask. But I think in this instance the cask finishing time has been sort of just about on the right side. It's a little bit heavy on the STR cask, but I think overall really good. And the Ardmore, I thought the Ardmore was exceptionally good. Yeah, really very good. I wouldn't bother putting any water with it. I mean, although it is 58%, it actually doesn't really need the water. In actual fact, I think the water probably is well, I just personally, for me, it detracts from the overall character of the spirit. So I don't really, and it's not like it's a kind of a tongue ripper. It's not like a kind of I really need to add some water with this, because it's kind of like, I'm getting nothing other than alcohol. The alcohol is really well contained, and so I think overall I think this set of releases from Lady of the Glen is very good. I would certainly give it I'd give it an A personally. I think there's sort of an awful lot to like about this this set of releases, and certainly if they're available in your country and you can get your hands on them, I would definitely recommend them. So yeah, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, the first of the next 500. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good running.